to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-jung Cho. A space race is heating up between the two Koreas as both countries have successfully launched their first spy satellites into orbit. Today we discuss how these spy satellites will contribute to their respective military capabilities.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition.
군은 독자적인 정보 감시 정찰 능력을 확보하였으며 군 정찰 위성은 한경 3축 체계의 기반이 되는 핵심 전력으로
이 정찰 위성들의 생존력을 축소 및 제거해버리기 위한 자위권 차원의 대응성 행동 조치들을 고려하게 될 것이다.
South Korea is not the subject of multiple UN Security Council resolutions over its dangerous and destabilizing activities in this area.
In the studio with me, Mr. Vann Van Diepen, former Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for International Security and Non-Proliferation. Mr. Van Diepen was the National Intelligence Officer for Weapons of Mass Destruction and Proliferation in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Also joining us, Dr. Michael O. Hanlon, a Senior Fellow and Director of Research in Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. He also serves as a member of the Defense Policy Board at the U.S. Department of Defense. He is the author of The Crisis on the Korean Peninsula. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Now, Mr. Van Diepen, a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket carried ROK's first spy satellite into orbit just weeks after North Korea launched its own spy satellite into orbit. Now, a former South Korean defense minister said that North Korea is estimated to have spatial resolution of about 1 meters and South Korea has a 0.3 meters. So how is South Korea's spy satellite much more advanced than North Korea's?
Well, we don't really know that much about what North Korea's satellite capabilities might be. I would say that 1 meter is probably a very generous assessment, but we really don't know for sure. But clearly South Korea has better technology itself and free access to very advanced Western technology in order to be able to put these satellites together. So its satellite is almost certainly more capable in terms of the resolution and pointing accuracy and other attributes of a reconnaissance satellite.
Mm-hmm. So what can North Korea learn from that?
That level would still be useful in the sense that it would give you a sense of general levels of activities at installations. It could help you identify the advent of a new installation. It could help you identify large groupings of troops or aircraft or ships. And so, that information would certainly be helpful, but it's not going to give you, detailed technical information about, the attributes of an aircraft or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Dr. O'Hanlon, South Korea's defense ministry said that now South Korea has independent intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance capabilities. Will South Korea gradually reduce its reliance to the point of elimination on U.S. satellite assets? And if South Korea gains more satellite capabilities, how would U.S. and South Korea's space cooperation evolve in the future?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to see South Korea continue to advance its military technology in general, and it's one more capability for the alliance. But I don't think that autarky needs to be the goal. This is about as close of an alliance as the United States has anywhere on Earth. In fact, in many ways, it is the most closely integrated in terms of the way units are formed and structured and made up of Korean and American soldiers or other troops. So I don't really think we need to emphasize whether South Korea can do this by itself or somehow wean itself off dependence on the United States. If there were ever a conflict on the Korean Peninsula, that would become immediately the Americans' top priority as well. And so our massive space capabilities would be largely focused on Korea. But I have no objection. It's more capability for the alliance, so that's good. It's more redundancy, just in case something goes wrong. And in certain kinds of multiple crisis situations where there isn't yet a conflict in Korea, God willing, there never will be, but where there's a crisis in Korea, but also a crisis or two or three elsewhere in the world, like today, then South Korea would have the ability to still emphasize collection in and around the peninsula when the United States might be partly distracted. And so in that sense, more capability is fine. But South Korea doesn't need to aspire to somehow replacing American intelligence, I don't believe.
Mr. Van Diepen, South Korea's National Intelligence Service briefed lawmakers and said that they believe Russia's help is behind North Korea's successful spy satellite launch. Do you agree with that?
Well, that's the only indication so far in open sources of that being the case. We've not heard that from other Western intelligence, other Western governments. And South Korea has a history of trying to denigrate North Korea's capabilities and achievements, especially in space and space launch areas. So it may well be the case that Russia provided some technology, but given the short amount of time between the Putin-Kim meeting in mid-September and the launch of the satellite in mid-November, I think it's very unlikely that there would have been sufficient time for some meaningful information to have been provided by the Russians, checked out by the North Koreans, incorporated into the satellite and or the booster, and then used in that launch. So I think it's probably pretty unlikely that there was any substantial additional contribution as a result of the Kim-Putin visit.
So Dr. Hanlon, is Russia so desperate that it will give away its missile technology to North Korea for ammunition? Like, given what's going on in the war in Ukraine, what is your take?
My answer is yes. I think Russia is in a very tough fight, and it would be willing to make some pretty interesting trades from a North Korean perspective for ammunition. This is a very ammunition-intensive fight in Ukraine right now. The Russians have been averaging 5,000 to 10,000 artillery shells fired per day for almost 2 years. Their industry is doing better than we had hoped at rebuilding their stockpiles, but in the short to medium term, they are still lacking as much as they would like. And I don't really think it's going to make a big difference whether they have a lot of North Korean artillery, ammunition, and other assets or not. But they still want to be able to consider going on the offensive in certain places. They want to create the sense of Ukraine losing momentum, or at least not gaining any momentum, because they think that will affect Western political will, and they may be right. And so for that reason, the Russians are happy to have, in almost, I wouldn't say desperate, but they're quite happy to have North Korean artillery stocks and other kinds of simple ammunition. And I don't really think they're all that worried about North Korea ever attacking them. And so I don't think they would feel that much compunction about seeing North Korea get some more advanced weaponry. I don't know what exactly they would give them, but I wouldn't be surprised, for example, if some better aircraft were part of the equation.
What about ICBM technology, re-entry technology? That would be a direct threat to the U.S. mainland, and that would be a game changer in the whole threat environment.
Yeah, that's a more sensitive call for Russia, because they know they would have to know that that could also produce an American counterreaction. And so I think that's perhaps a little less likely than aircraft or something else where North Korea would benefit in its own neighborhood from having that kind of additional capability. But who knows?
And Mr. Van Diepen, North Korea's spy satellite has minimal military contribution for now, but how would a further space development give more capabilities to North Korea? And how would Russian help accelerate the timing that North Korea needs to further develop its satellite and satellite space launch vehicles?
Well, I think what we can expect the North Koreans to do over time is to, first of all, put up additional satellites. You really need to have a network of satellites to have a meaningful military contribution, to increase the capability of the individual satellites. So, for example, for the imaging satellites, to increase the resolution, to eventually augment daytime imaging satellites with something like radar satellites that can do nighttime imaging, et cetera. To do that, they're going to need larger satellites and therefore larger space launch vehicles. And we already see them having made the preparations at their space launch facility to launch a larger space launch vehicle. So they almost certainly have one in development right now. Potentially Russian assistance could make all that happen better and faster. But again, we don't know what assistance the Russians have or will provide, as well as we don't really know for sure what the Russians may give in return.
Dr. Hanlon, North Korea has said that it would respond to U.S. interference in space by rendering U.S. satellites useless. And if North Korea does that, what would be U.S. retaliation? And also, U.S. Space Command said that the U.S. could deny any adversary's space capabilities through a variety of means. What would be some of those variety of means?
You know, the United States in peacetime is probably not going to want to destroy North Korean satellites. But we could try to jam the communications between those satellites and ground stations. And presumably North Korea is not going to have that many places on Earth where it could build ground stations. Now, it may enter into a secret deal with Iran or somebody else far away, where it could have a ground station on the territory of that country. And if we didn't find out about it, we would be hard-pressed to jam the downlink in that case. In time of war, of course, we would probably be willing to destroy satellites, and North Korea might be willing to launch a nuclear weapon into space to complicate the operations of our satellites. So I think all things are possible in war. And there's a good chance that both sides would have serious degradation to their satellite fleets. We would have a lot more options for reconnaissance because of our control of the airspace in the Korean peninsula. But of course, this is a terrible thing to start thinking about, because now we're going up a ladder of escalation where if we're destroying North Korean satellites, they're potentially launching a nuclear weapon in space, thinking about using their nuclear arsenal to prevent us from attacking positions inside North Korea. We could see the worst war in human history. It could rival World War II in fatalities very fast.
Mr. Van Diepen, does North Korea have that capability to fire nuclear weapon into space? We talk about angles, we talk about trajectories that North Korea is doing. If North Korea changes angle upwards, can North Korea do that?
Well, first of all, I think what you heard from the North Koreans is almost certainly propagandistic bluster. I don't think we should put an awful lot of credence in this idea that, yes, they're going to, take out our satellites. And I'm not sure that the Space Command statement was all that helpful, since we're way far away from any sort of situation where any of that is likely to happen. Could North Korea put a nuclear weapon up in proximity to a satellite? Yeah, probably. But as Michael pointed out, the cost benefit of that doesn't work out very well for them. They're going to open up Pandora's box for a relatively minimal gain, given the fact that we've got other satellites that would be rotating past in orbit that they couldn't get to with their nuclear weapons, not to mention the other reconnaissance means that we have. So I really think this is a highly unlikely scenario that's.
And South Korea's goal is to get 4 more satellites into orbit by 2025, and now using the synthetic aperture radar. And also they're going to develop a microsatellite system. How would that improve South Korea's watch on the Korean Peninsula 24/7?
Well, assuming all of that happens and it works the way it's supposed to, then that means they'll have the capability, both day and night with, a substantial amount of frequency to watch what's going on in North Korea. But you still have to be able to process all of that data, analyze all of that data, get the results of that data out to the people who know. So there's a lot more to it than just having the requisite number of satellites up. And then also we shouldn't underestimate the very substantial camouflage, concealment, and deception capabilities that North Korea has. They can, by camouflaging things, by keeping things indoors, they can deny a lot of information even to that kind of satellite network. And we know this because we've had very substantial satellite surveillance on North Korea for decades. And there are still a lot of things we don't know and a lot of things that we don't see.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Hanlon, U.S. Indo-PACOM Commander Admiral John Aquilino said that China is engaged in the largest military buildup since World War II at the greatest speed, both in the conventional and nuclear ring, in all domains: maritime, air, land, and sea, and space and cyberspace. So given China's massive military buildup, will South Korea's satellite capabilities be helpful in responding to the Chinese threat in the region?
A couple of things to unpack there. First of all, Admiral Aquilino makes an important point, but you could actually debate that a little bit, because the biggest military buildups since World War II have been in the United States. in terms of resources. We had a huge buildup for a number of the wars we fought, and we had a huge buildup after 9/11, and we even had a fairly substantial buildup during the Trump years that outpaced, in absolute dollar terms, what the Chinese were doing at the same time. So certainly the Chinese have come a long way. I don't mean to dispute that main point. And they certainly are the world's largest military by a lot of counts, and certainly the world's second best resourced military. But I just want to make that statement because we do sometimes get all worked up about the China threat, and we should watch the China challenge. But I would put a little bit of an asterisk by the Admiral's comment. Second, South Korea, of course, has a complicated position vis-a-vis China, and we Americans need to always appreciate that, because sometimes we assume that South Korea is going to line up with us on whatever broader regional priority we have vis-a-vis China, and that's not always smart for South Korea. And we go back to the Bush administration's request, the infamous request for strategic flexibility in American forces on the Korean Peninsula, meaning that we wanted advance permission to be able to use them in a Taiwan Strait contingency however we saw fit. And of course, South Korea said no, and South Korea was correct to say no. So Americans need to remember that any ally is completely sovereign and equal to us. And I think the US-ROK alliance is built to demonstrate that because of the way units are interwoven with each other's personnel, because the Blue House and White House both have overarching political supervision and control of the alliance and the military dimension to it. But Americans need to always bear in mind that South Korea, yes, is going to always be watching China, but may or may not want to use its reconnaissance satellites to target China. And we may not want to implicate South Korea in any crisis right away, because we Americans are several thousand miles away, but South Korea has to live next to China for the rest of history. And so, again, these are points that are obvious to Koreans, but Americans can sometimes forget.
But isn't USFK strategic flexibility, isn't that still a very valid US policy that is still in place?
No.
It is not?
Not to my understanding.
Out of the picture now?
Yeah, not to my understanding. South Korea never accepted the idea. If what you mean, let's use the words in different ways to maybe answer the question. Maybe we're both right here in the sense that the formal US request in the Bush administration that we would be granted advance permission for whatever the contingency to use our assets in Korea was denied by South Korea, as I understand it, and later recognized to be a mistake even by Bush administration officials. I've been on stage at Brookings with Mike Green, for example, when he said that out loud. But the idea that in theory we could use assets in Korea in a regional conflict, if Seoul agreed at the time, then yes, that's possible. If that's what you mean by strategic flexibility, it's still there. But there's no advance permission, there's no blank check. I think South Korea has protected its sovereign right to make its own decisions about what happens on and from its territory, as it should.
Mr. Van Diepen, South Korea recently suspended part of the comprehensive military agreement with North Korea that was forged in 2018, and North Korea went and abrogated the whole thing. And South Korean Defense Ministry says that because of the comprehensive military agreement, its ISR capabilities have been compromised and limited. But today we talked about the satellite capabilities. With U.S. astounding satellite capabilities, wouldn't that be more than enough to make up for whatever was limited by the comprehensive military agreement?
I think in peacetime on a day-to-day basis, I think that's probably correct. The limitations, the sort of standoff distances that South Korean aircraft and drones had to abide by under the agreement really would have much more of an impact on sort of tactical intelligence than the kind of strategic intelligence that the U.S. can provide and the South Koreans can do with signals intelligence and now with their satellites. So I think on a day-to-day basis, I think that's probably correct.
Dr. O'Hanlon, former USFK commanders Scaparotti and Abrams said that they are concerned that the tensions on the Korean Peninsula may reach a level not seen in recent years because of what's happened with the comprehensive military agreement. Do you agree with that?
Well, it's hard to disagree with those two, and they've got a lot of expertise, and they've spent a lot of time tactically watching what's going on. In a broader sense, however, I'm not as concerned about any specific denial of tactical intelligence because both sides are so built up. And the Ukraine war should remind us that a little bit of an advantage here or there in sort of sneaking in an ambush because one or another reconnaissance capabilities were pulled back or otherwise denied. It's not going to work that way. These defenses are so deeply entrenched that anybody who tries sort of a small little ambush is going to be quickly repulsed. And anybody who tries something big is going to be seen anyway. Certainly, if the North Koreans try to prepare something big, we'll see it. They're hoping to have the same kind of capability in regard to us, but I think they also know we're not going to attack them. They may claim otherwise, but they know we're not. So in that regard, I think there is sort of a tactical and even a operational level of stability in Korea. What worries me is not so much the loss of these day-to-day tactical capabilities. It's more the broad trends. With Kim Jong-un building up a nuclear arsenal of dozens of weapons with longer-range ICBMs becoming, more within his reach, with inter-Korean relations often being strained, with all the talk of war plans and decapitation strategies on the two sides. I don't expect a major crisis tomorrow, but I don't like the trend.
And we're talking about the big trend, and we also talked about South Korea's ISR capabilities. President Yoon Suk-yeol, soon after he was elected, did an interview with VOA, and he said that South Korea needs to have a certain level of ISR to be able to do a joint wartime operation with the United States. So South Korea now having successful satellite launch, did that accelerate the timing of the OPCON transfer, do you think?
Well, I've always been against OPCON transfer, and I still am, and I always will be. So I hope not. And I think that OPCON transfer doesn't make sense in a situation where the United States is an $850 billion a year military superpower, and the ROK is an extremely impressive regional military. And we're the ones that have the global capabilities in nuclear capability, in space reconnaissance, even with South Korea's progress. We're the ones that are sort of the backup of last resort for overthrowing North Korea's regime if a war begins and Seoul and Washington decide that that's the appropriate goal. I just don't see why OPCON transfer is a good idea.
Well, what the two capitals agreed on was the conditions-based OPCON transfer, that if the conditions are met, the transfer will be made.
That's because somebody made a mistake 20 years ago, and once the mistake was made, it was hard to say that it was a mistake. So they went from a specific date to a conditions-based promise, hoping the conditions would probably never materialize. That's what I think is going on. The United States never enters into these kinds of agreements with any other country, partly because we are sort of lucky to be here in North America and to some extent want to preserve our prerogative not to get involved, but even more because we now are committed in so many different places, and we are far and away the world's #1 military superpower, and it's often our nuclear deterrent that's the ultimate backstop to a lot of alliances. Now, if South Korea wants to have a nuclear debate, that's fine. I hope they don't, but if they want to, that's fine. It's within their sovereign rights. And I think that South Korea could be a responsible nuclear power if they so chose. I don't think they need it. But even if they had that, I still think the United States would be the overwhelming military giant in the alliance, just as we are in any other alliance we're part of. And so I just don't think that giving operational control of our forces to someone else makes sense. Tactically, yes. And certainly at a high strategic level, the Blue House and the White House need to have equal sovereign control over the core decision-making in any future conflict. So at the highest level, yes, the two sides are equal. At the tactical level, yes, the two sides may command each other's forces, serve under each other's soldiers. But at the operational level of decision-making in war, I'm against it because the United States is about 15 to 20 times the military size and scale. It's in dollar terms.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap up our discussion here. Dr. O. Hanlon, Mr. Van Diepen, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very kindly.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.